Now, I'm going to approach the whole subject uh, in more of material terms and more in terms of history of India in last 150 years or so, because that's the history which has a very clear bearing on our lives today, on spirituality as we have come to talk about it, understand it, to use it, and also about human rights, which are largely, I wouldn't venture to say a concoction, but I would say which are largely a Western idea coming out of the world of enlightenment, modernized, along with a dash of Christianity. So I'm going to bring the subject to what is happening in our lives today in terms of spirituality and in terms of human rights. Spirituality first. You see, in Indian terms, spirituality is a very nebulous term. I don't think it's possible to translate it into any Indian language, and least of all in Sanskrit. The whole idea of spirituality takes off in 19th century and with theosophy and various other disciplines and seekers coming from the West into India. The idea was that there is a world of the spirit and, of course, of the ultimate spirit. Uh, and people had different ideas about it, as always. And this spirit is beyond religion, it is beyond organized ritual, it is beyond certain uh, religious or church like or episcopal activity or dharmic activity that we follow. And there was a very clear prejudice in this, that spirituality is superior and ritual or practice of things is inferior. Now, if I were to look frankly for something like what is spiritual in India, then the first test which is required is to find out what is it that elevates the spirit and what is it that makes us rise beyond what we are, to realize that we are in some way immortal or are immortal. Amritasya putraha, as the Veda put it. So, for that, mere belief is not enough. In all the Indian systems, what is required is a sadhana. Now, it is the sadhana actually which brings result. And any kind of a belief which may be about God or which may be about other human beings is not sufficient to give any result, because that is only an intellectual belief. That is just a concept. That is just, at best, something called faith. And faith, as we know, has been defined in the Christian tradition as evidence of things hoped for and things which are unseen, as the Bible puts it. Now, the whole idea that I believe in something which I have not seen is not sufficient in India. I want to experience something. And for that, all Indian systems have talked about a sadhana. So, spirituality in India, whether it is the Mimamsakas of Veda, or it is the Bauddhas or the Jainas, the Shaivas, later on the Vaishnavas, whatever, Tantrics and Shaktas, they all have something to practice which begins. So if Buddha chose a new way, new in the sense that it was not the way of the four Vedas, not the way of Mimamsakas, then he prescribed Shila. He prescribed a method which had to be practiced. Similarly, yoga would prescribed in an Ashtang mark. Sadhana is the important thing, and sadhana is what brings something called a spiritual realization or swanubhuti. So, what has happened in our whole intellectual discourse in India is that we have come to equate spirituality with largely Judaic or Christian terms, and we have tried to define the whole Indian philosophical system and Indian system of belief as a shadow of that. That we believe there is one God, that we believe that all people are equal, that we believe this, that we believe that. And it is the belief which is the credo. This is very different from the whole idea of somebody who has to do a sadhana, because the amount of knowledge that you attain, the way in which you really become spiritual, if you at all want to use that term, is by swanubhuti, is by a certain modicum of self experience. And as Bhartrihari said, that Shiva is what? He is Swanabhutim Ekam Anaya. He is just one who is to be experienced. Shiva is not to be talked about. He is to be experienced through a sadhana. So, this whole business of spirituality, which we are believing today in India as a hangover from the colonial system, is based more upon belief and less upon practice. Now, this has had some very disastrous impact. And the disastrous impact is that all the activity which had to be done as a sadhana has been put aside as ritual. Ritual has been considered as something inferior. So we have very eminent people, like I can take Shashi Tharoor for an example, who says Hinduism fits me because I can be an ascetic, I can be a Nastic, I can go to the temple, I don't go to the temple, I believe in this, I believe in that, I can eat meat, I may not eat meat. Now, so this whole business of laissez-faire, this whole business of Hinduism providing me so many entertaining things, just like a big mall or a penny store does so many objects of consumerism, is not Hinduism. Hinduism is basically attachment to a way of sadhana. Unless I do a sadhana somewhere and get results out of that. Now, for that, we have had a denigration of the ritual. And this denigration of the ritual has created a misunderstanding in our religious life. It has led us to a neglect of the temple. It has led us not to understand as to what is proper ritual and how it is to be done. It has brought so many distortions in modern life and modern Hindu life in particular. For instance, see a modern Hindu wedding. People are busy eating, drinking, making merry, having a great party, but the ritual aspect of it, the sanskar aspect of it, is totally neglected. And everybody saying, Panditji, jaldi karo, jaldi karo, jaldi karo. So, what you have really done is you are left with no experience, you are left with no understanding of what you are doing. Whereas this was a wonderful, marvelous system in the history of India for 5,000 years, in which whatever had to be done manasa, vacha, and karmana. It had to be done with the mind. It had to be done with speech. And it had to be done with action altogether. And this was a ritual. Now, this has created many problems in our life today because we are on a spree of reforming rituals. You see, for instance, somebody very important said that there'll be no Kanyadan. And an important person, he said that at his son's wedding, there would be no Kanyadan. And he thought Kanyadan was very silly. Doing Kanyadan was like giving an old pant or an old shirt. And I wrote a full article on this to explain the value of Dan and the intrinsic nature of the ritual of Dan, that it is giving the most precious thing. So it is given publicly, it is done in a manner that not only it is done socially, but it is also done spiritually. And it is this lack of understanding of our system of rituals which has led us into so many confusions, particularly in conflict with the modern values of freedom, of rights of women. I mean, I need not refer or talk about, but just it is sufficient to indicate the case of Sabarimala, where two parallel systems were operating, and the modern judicial system was not able to follow the 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 sense of the ritual which was necessary in the worship in the temple in that particular case. Now, this is the conflict with which the modern human rights come in. Because the human rights are formulated around 48, they were done with a very different purpose. They were done with the purpose of managing all kinds of moving populations, all kinds of upheavals that had taken place as a result of the Second World War. And it was largely a project in which the so-called human rights were defined by the era of enlightenment with a big dash of Christianity and the Christian beliefs. And then they were considered to be absolutely universal, and they were prescribed for all non-Western cultures of the world. And so, when they became textbook things, and when they were taught to us as they are still being taught exactly in the manner as they are taught today, then this conflict between the ancient world, the world of ritual, the world of spirituality, the world of practicing something related to divine as I have understood and as my culture has understood, and the conflict with the modern notion of freedom inevitably arises. It is not only that, it becomes worse. It sometimes becomes very political. Just as, I mean, take an example, if you don't want carpets to be imported into US, then the US can very easily tell us that these carpets are made by children and there is a violation of human rights. And so you impose human rights in order to push certain economic interest. The point that I'm trying to make is that there is a whole concept of what is human rights in India. I'll just take 2 minutes more and wind up. And that is not placing man at the center of the universe. If you look at all the Indian philosophy and the crux of dharma and the dharma shastras, then they don't place human beings at the center of the universe. They just don't talk about manava dharma. They talk about dharma which is to be followed by human beings, but seeing the whole universe. So it is not just me, man, but other creatures, living creatures, the environment, the prakriti, as was referred to right in the beginning of this lecture. It is what we owe to others and how we are part of that. And they also have rights. So it is not just human rights to be seen for the well-being of human beings. It is to be seen for other animals, birds, creatures, air, water, pancha tattva, etc. And the concept of the rina, in India, that is what a human being owes and what a human being must perform, is for the rest of the universe. The very idea of yajna is that the individual gives himself, sacrifices himself into the yajna, because yajna is the universe itself. So we have a concept of higher human rights, as a name was suggested to me very rightly. And this concept of higher human rights or beyond human rights, something which could be called the cosmic rights or the rights of the order, rights of the rhyth. And the Greeks use a word called diki for it. That is what is there as the truth of the universe. Now, that is to be seen, and that is to be seen beyond small time politics, beyond the interest of individual countries, beyond the interest of small sections of people, whether they are older jatis or modern jatis or modern conglomerations. They have to be seen in this widest context. And it is at this point that so called spirituality and human rights can meet in a bigger context. Thank you very much for a patient listening.